Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual discussion series that's hosted by the Chaldean Cultural Center in collaboration with U of M Detroit Center, Unique Voices in Films, and CMN TV. Today, our special guest is Ashtar. And, I didn't practice your last name. How do you say your last name?
Alkhirsan.
Alkhirsan. And
Yes.
Ashtar is based in the United Kingdom, and she's an award-winning filmmaker. She's a graduate of the National Film and Television School, and she began her career making arts documentaries for the BBC. Following the death of her father, she became interested in the experience of the generation Iraqi men and women who came to the UK in the 50s and 60s, and who she thinks are part of a forgotten diaspora. Very interesting, Ashtar. You were born in the United Kingdom?
I was, yes, I was. To an Iraqi father and an English mother. Yeah.
So I'm curious, have you ever had the chance to visit Iraq?
No,
not
sadly
yet.
Not. And, I think about it often and wonder whether, I think I will at some stage. I think I have to be really, really honest to say I'm quite fearful, actually, about visiting Iraq. When my father died, I felt very conflicted because I arranged for his body to be, he died in London, but I arranged for his remains to be taken back to be buried in Iraq. He wanted to be buried in Iraq. And I felt very conflicted about whether I should accompany him. But it was sort of thought within my family that it was probably better that I didn't, actually.
What year was this?
My father died in 2015, so 6 years ago.
It was a little bit of a hot spot over there, right?
Yeah, it was
during that time, particularly.
Yeah.
And we were talking about the uniqueness of your name. I was under the assumption that Ashtar was Ishtar with a little bit of an Arabic accent, but then you told me a more interesting story associated with your name.
Indeed. It was my father who insisted that I was called Ashtar and not Ishtar. And when I asked him why he had done that, he did actually say to me, well, I'm not really sure. And, she was an alcoholic prostitute. So, and he sort of threw his head back and laughed at, at that idea. But, that was what.
He was just like, he was making it maybe a little bit more original, like instead of maybe you're right after her, but then with that one letter that's different. So, but I love your name regardless. I still associate it with Ashtar.
Thank you.
And so as a British woman with an Iraqi background, what was that like for you?
Well, I think growing up, I felt very conflicted. My parents actually separated when I was young, so I didn't grow up with my father. But I really do believe there is nothing as present in your life as an absent parent. They become even more present when, for me anyway, my father's presence in my life was something that really was with me my entire life, I think, up until, I reconnected with my father when I was in my 30s, actually. So I grew up, a good deal of my life without him, but I was always very, very aware of, and felt very conflicted, actually, about my kind of essence, in a sense, and my identity. It's a word that we use a lot, but, we all have a sense of self. And I think finding a balance between your Britishness and my Iraqiness, or my non-Britishness, is a kind of lifelong pursuit, really, actually. And I'm very interested in ideas and people who carry a kind of internal conflict. And I think, for me, I think that is present in a lot of Iraqis, actually, a lot of people that I know within my own family and outside of my own family. I think that is present, that there's some kind of stamp on you as an individual. I do believe that you carry these birthmarks, really.
You do. And, you know, this is the same as we are with the same group of the Iraqi creative diasporas who are from all over the world. And, you know, no matter what part of the world they're at, you still carry that within you. And I came here as a child to the United States, leaving Baghdad. And as you grow up, and there is an attempt to disconnect and, you know, blend in with everybody and just grow up very westernized. And you do that for a while, but then you do come to a phase where you realize you really want to reconnect with your heritage in a way. And then through that, you come to a balance. And I like how you said that. Yeah. And it seems like for you, even though you were born here, there's the same kind of feelings that you have gone through. Regarding your career, when did you decide to become a storyteller or filmmaker? And when did the Iraqi theme enter into your work?
Well, I think I was always really fascinated and very connected to films and not filmmaking, actually. It wasn't something that I really thought was open to me. You know, particularly as a woman, I felt that it felt like a very elitist kind of job, or, you know, way to spend your time in a way, you know, and it felt like a right of expression that I suppose I didn't really feel was open to me, actually. But I think, you know, we all have certain moments in our lives, these kind of landmark moments in our lives. And for me, it was one of those was seeing a Fassbinder film, a German film called Fear Eats the Soul, when it has in it a character. It's about a German woman who falls in love with a North African man. And I think for me, that was the first time I really started to understand a sense of otherness that I had, actually. And I really was deeply, deeply moved and connected to this couple's relationship, this Eastern-Western meeting and blending. And I think that's really cemented an interest that I had in films. And you know, I've worked in quite mainstream kind of institutions. You know, I worked before I started to pursue this slightly different way of making films and storytelling. So, you know, I've made, as you mentioned, a lot of arts documentaries, and I worked for the BBC for a long time. And I worked making, you know, I've worked and done a lot of comedy and made a lot of films about comedians. I mean, that was something that really interested me, actually. And when I did reconnect with my father and my family, I realized that actually English comedy was something that Iraqis really resonated with Iraqis, actually. So in a way, it kind of, now when I look at it, I think actually it does fit with a kind of identity of Iraqiness, actually. To, you know, they all knew who these English comedians were, and there was a kind of fascination with them. So, but actually it was when my father died that I really felt I wanted to make a film about him and what his experience had been like, because it was such, I mean, it is such a profound moment when we lose one of our parents, you know, under whatever circumstances. But my father had dementia, and it was a very particular experience because he was very, very fixed on Iraq, on returning. And it was something that, you know, he was so ill, it wasn't possible for him to do that whilst he was alive. But I came to see dementia as something very, very interesting because, and in fact, I think one of your previous interviewees talked about this. Her father had also, I think, died of dementia. That it you know, this loss of memory, this loss of sense of self, this reimagining of your past. It seemed to me so resonant with people who can't return, you know, who are trying to hold on to their essence of themselves in a country that they weren't born in. So I wanted to make a film that tried to touch on some of those ideas, really. And it was the film that I made, Abdullah and Leilah, was very much about trying to imagine what was going on in my dad's head and in his heart, actually, you know, wanting desperately to go back, but being surrounded by all these, you know, people who didn't understand him spiritually, emotionally, you know, didn't understand the language that he was speaking. So, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I know I was very touched. There was an interview that you had on your website that I saw, and I don't remember now if the character in your film or if it was actually your dad, where they suddenly didn't remember anything from their Western world, but only everything that they remembered was just the ones from Iraq. Was that,
Yeah.
or is that, or the both care, both?
Well, no, perhaps with dementia, people very usually revert back to speaking in their first language. So whether it doesn't matter whether you come from Spain, from you know, Germany, from Iraq, from Iran, from Sudan, you are likely, if you are living in a country that you weren't born in, if you have a second language, you will lose your second language. That is what dementia does to you. It's one of the skills that you lose, and you will more often than not revert to speaking in your first language. So for my father, obviously that was Arabic. So, but he was so confused, he thought he was speaking in English. So people would say to him, can you speak in English? Can you speak in English? And he would say, but he would say it in Arabic, but he would say, but I am speaking in English. The confusion is such, it's so multi-layered. And, you know, it's a kind of double whammy for people really when they have dementia, that, you know, they're not understood emotionally and they're not understood physically if they're not in the country that they were born in. So I think this notion of return, of retreating, not necessarily retreating, but somehow going back to your distilled essence as a person when you have dementia, when you're, you know, when you get to that age, is something again that I found really, really moving, you know, for people who were not born in a country that they end up dying in. It's, and that, you know, we know that this is very, very common now. You know, there've been this huge, in the past 15, 20 years, this huge movement of people and communities around the world. And if you're lucky enough to live into a very old age, you may well get dementia. And you're going to have this experience of, as I've just said, you know, dying in a country that you weren't born in. And that is it's a very, very profound, very complex, I think, situation for people.
So when you're talking, you know, so my mother had dementia. My mother lived the last 5 years of her life in my house, and she didn't really know English. So there wasn't that part about the language that I noticed, but we did notice that she would remember anything from a long time ago. So if we showed her an album, a black and white album, she could pinpoint all the pictures that were so old, but then she didn't remember, you know, something that's newer. Obviously, this is one of the things that they have. And I did feel this essence just with her living with me, sometimes not even having to speak, the sense of her traveling to the past. I sensed that it was a very strange but beautiful feeling at the same time. That's what, when you say about it being moving, I sensed she would go in a certain direction, and then I would put the Arabic channel for her because that's a language that she spoke. And so we had these movies that were mostly made by the British during the time that the British was in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And the cinema became very powerful during that time.
Yes.
And so when I was watching the trailer for Abdullah and Leilah, the first thing that caught my attention and just took me there and took me to my mom is Nazim al-Ghazali singing this famous song, Fog al-Nakhal, which not was only special for my mom, but even I remember it as a child there. And when just those words, and it kind of like woke me up, but to the past, you know. I gotta tell you, I was very touched that you started it that way, and then I read why you did. Now the song is Fog al-Nakhal is like on top of the palm tree, which kind of is like in the American expression is like on cloud nine, like when you're very happy, we're on cloud nine. I don't know if the British use that term or a different term.
Absolutely.
But I would like you to share a little bit about why you chose that song, what it means, and just kind of your own experience with it.
Well, I chose the song because my father loved Nazim al-Ghazali. He loved the music. He lost a lot of language skills, my father, both in English and eventually in Arabic, but he knew the words to all those songs. So on my little phone, I would hold the phone up and play YouTube videos of Nazim to my father, and he would be transported. I think he would really, the joy and the sadness actually that he experienced. It was a roller coaster of emotions. And I think we know it's recognized amongst dementia professionals and practitioners that music is very transformative to people when they have dementia. And I think for my father, and it's just the image of this man singing who is a kind of, you know, almost like a sort of Frank Sinatra-like figure.
Right,
for,
exactly.
for us, you know, it was very, very meaningful to me, and it suggested a kind of just a joy. Just a joy in voice, in clothes, in the body, in the spirit. You know, when I see those images of him singing, he embodies, you know, there's a beautiful theatricality to it that I love, you know, which is very Iraqi, very Arabic, really, you know, quite extreme emotion and, you know, poetic expressiveness.
Poetic. That's what I was gonna say. That, like you mentioned in one of your interviews, the poetry, the romance. Yes. It was a period that seems like that's what the beautiful part about the memory. For us, when we look back in that era, we see a whole different experience that we are seeing today with the media. I mean, I haven't been to Iraq in a long time either. And when I was in 2000, I also have different memories than what is portrayed in the images. So it's always different when you're there. But yeah, those songs, and then I just enjoyed the quality of how you chose aside from the story, the acting. So one of the things that you did is also you included the iconic Iraqi figure, Sami Abdul Hameed, and he plays Abdullah. And I thought, so these important parts of creating this short film, I thought was very touching. Now, I'm curious, you know, because I know that he died in 2019 in Jordan. So how did you meet him, and how did the whole process happen and he became part of this film?
Well, when I was looking to cast that figure, I really wanted somebody who, in a way, represented something to Iraqi people. And I spoke to members of my family, and I spoke to my father's brother and said, who are the really magnificent Iraqi actors? And he mentioned, you know, 3 or 4 names, and Sami's was there. And it was interesting, as soon as I saw his face, Sami's face, there's a kindness and a charisma to Sami's face. And he's done very little films, Sami Abdul Hameed. But when I saw a couple of clips of things that he was in, and he was in them quite fleetingly, actually. But you were interested in him. Mm-hmm. And so I knew I wanted him as this character. So I flew out to Jordan to meet him. I thought, we've got to, you know, I couldn't bear the idea of, you know, trying to find somebody who was too young, or somebody who, you know, didn't have the weight that I knew I wanted the character to have, you know. So I flew out to Jordan to meet him, and as soon as I met him, you know, it was hard not to sort of fall in love with him, really, because he was funny, highly intelligent, you know, emotionally intelligent, intellectually very wise, and very, very charismatic person, you know. So you know, I'm so glad I did that. So we flew him over. I mean, Sami did live in Baghdad, but he used to go to Jordan, you know, to get away from the heat. I mean, Jordan is so hot in itself, but, you know, it's got nothing on, I think, Baghdad at certain times. So, I mean, Sami actually died I think he was in Baghdad when he died. But
did he? Okay, then maybe,
yeah.
I just read, and I must have gotten the wrong information. But you went through all this. This is like so commendable and inspiring to hear you as a filmmaker. I think right now, just sharing your experience is a great example of artists, filmmakers, writers. When you want a story or you're trying to do something, really, it's just pursuing it. It's just following the steps to get it done. And just now saying, well, I wanted him, and so he was the perfect character, and I didn't want to settle for somebody else, and so I flew there, and then we flew him back. And this is for anybody listening. Sometimes, like, we try to give messages for our young artists, especially, and who feel sometimes they're not being heard or they're not finding the right opportunity. But sometimes it's a matter of just getting it done first.
Yes.
And then finding those opportunities after the fact. So that's a great story. How about the woman? His daughter was also a great actress.
She's a fantastic actor, Huda Eshwafni. She is just a wonderful actress. I mean, she's just magnificent. I've worked with her a couple of times now. And again, it's just, I feel incredibly lucky to have worked with her, actually. And, just working with Sami was one of the great kind of privileges of my life, really. And
I'm sure for him too, that, that made a difference for him too, at his age, because he passed away around like 92 or something.
Yes.
So that he had this opportunity to leave this kind of a mark towards the end of his life.
I think his mark was left in the world of theatre, really. I mean, that's where Sam's background is. And I think, he was an extraordinary man. I mean, he flew here to make a short film. It wasn't like I was offering him a feature film. He was a man of just incredible generosity and charm. And, he came here to make this little short film. And, we didn't have a lot of money. So, and he ended up staying in what was very humble accommodation. He came with his wife, who is Fawzia Aref, who is also a really wonderful Iraqi actress. She is fantastic as well, and she came with him. And I mean, I would love to work with her at some stage, actually. But I think, you can't go wrong with him. He brings everything to it. And sorry, Huda's extraordinary. I think if you can find people who are emotionally intelligent and emotionally open, there's something that happens when the camera turns on them that, I mean, she's a beautiful, beautiful actress to look at, but she also, there's wonderful things going on.
She has a lot of depth in her character.
She really does, doesn't she?
Yeah,
she
and
really
you could tell, like, for her, when she's acting as being from Middle Eastern background, and I love foreign films from all over the world. I used to watch them over anything. And it doesn't matter if the talent, if the story is great and the talent is good, and if you combine these together, you can connect with anybody. That's why art is so beautiful, because it transcends nationality, religion, everything else, and you can just connect with the actor. But it does help. It's very important. That's why the director and the writer, it's when they're bringing the story, if they write it from the heart and they bring in the authentic people along, it just works well. So that's what happened, I feel like, in your story. And so we're looking forward to, it brings us to this last question about some of the projects that you're currently working on. Can you share what you're working on currently?
Yes, I've got two projects that I'm working on. One project is about the UK AIDS Memorial Quilt, which I don't know if you're aware of, about the American AIDS quilt.
Yes, I know about the American quilt. I did.
Yeah, well, we have one in the UK, which has been packed away in boxes for many years. And I was very involved with, I had a very close friend of mine, two very close friends. One of them was somebody I shared a flat with who died of AIDS in the 80s. And so I was very involved in campaigning and fundraising for people with AIDS during that time. And that person had a huge impact. His name was Mark Ashton. He had a huge impact on my life, and I made a panel for him. And quite recently, a panel was displayed the quilt in its entirety was displayed again in London. So I feel very moved to, we're still going through a pandemic at the moment, but, for many people, it's not their first pandemic. And the AIDS pandemic and the loss of men, women and children is something that has affected me and my life, the loss of those people. So I feel very moved to do that. And then the other thing is a kind of longer term project really that I've been working on for some time, which is about an Iraqi family who come to live here, and who it's really focusing on what happens when an Iraqi family moves into a small, predominantly British English community, and how the community reacts when adversity falls upon them. So it's I think it's quite political. You know, we're going through quite a difficult political time in my view in this country, and you know, there's a lot of awareness about racism, and I think there's a generation of young people coming through now who are much more willing to raise their voices, to demonstrate, to be proactive, and to call out a lot of racist hate. And I don't know if you're aware, you know, we've had the European Cup, the football competition in this country, which has raised a lot of issues around racism. So I'm very interested in creating a story that feels very, very current and resonates with the laws that the immigration laws, and the process of applying for asylum in this country has become very, very difficult. And I'm really interested in looking at that and developing, like with Abdullah and Leilah, a story that's emotional at its core. But
would it also be like a short film? Is that what you're
no, it's not a short. No, it's a longer project.
Oh,
yes,
good, good, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as I often say, there's a void in this area with stories that represent Middle Easterners in the Western world, yeah. And but I see this void every time I interview somebody. It's a lot of joy, because I see that this void is being filled little by little. There's people all over that are sharing their own stories, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. I thank you for all the work that you do. And I would love that when your film is complete, or even in the future with regards to Abdullah and Leilah, that we would have, once we start that up at some point, we'd like to do a film. We want to do like film screening series. And so
okay.
that's something that we're looking at in the near future. And so we'll be in touch again, and I'm sure that we'll be connecting and showing off your work again, because you're right, and you produce very fascinating and important stories.
Well, thank you very much. It's been really lovely to speak to you. And of course, we should also mention quickly, you know, there are many, many filmmakers coming out of Iraq and across the Middle East now. So it's not just the diaspora who are making films, you know, there are a lot of filmmakers, aren't there? We know.
Yes, I have to connect with you and others so I can track them down and get them on here too.
I'm very happy to do that. I know several Iraqi filmmakers who were.
Oh, there you go. Then I don't have to do that much work. Please send them over. I'd love to interview them.
Do that. I think, you know, this new generation of people making films, you know, there are Egyptian, I think an Egyptian film called Feathers has just won a big prize at Cannes. You know, it's the first Egyptian film. There are things happening now, you know, not just amongst diaspora filmmakers, but also filmmakers coming out of who live in the Middle East. And I think that's really
excellent. Yes, and you know, I watch those a lot. Netflix does have a good selection of Arab films that we watch, and some of them are, I like a lot of times, like the humor. I love the Arab humor, and you know, whether it's a serious movie or not, they always have, I just love the family life, the culture, and the humor. And believe, you know, most people don't get to see that, but in the Arab films, you do get to see that, because that's what they're focusing on mostly. But then when we watch some of the Western ones, it's the focus is on the war and the violence, you know. So maybe we can find a way to kind of bridge this together, bridge the
that
two.
Would be great. That would be great.
Yes, that would be good. Thank you so much, Ashtar. It was lovely.
Thank you. It's lovely to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.